And I'm going to share my screen so that everybody can see what I'm typing and what I'm talking about. Our topic for today is American paradoxes. The topic under consideration is in terms of the AP test, AP US history test. And there's a lot of content there, just like every history test, every AP history test. And I always use for my AP study, I always use the AP guidelines, the PDF that they give to all the teachers to structure their curriculums. But I use an additional framework to help understand a lot of different ways of understanding American history. And I find this concept of the American paradox is a useful lens to view many of the things that happen in American history. One of the things that people sometimes have difficulty with is because of America's position in world history and in world power, one of the big issues is a lot of people tend to view America as all bad, and a lot of people tend to view America as all good. But of course, like anything in history and anything involving human beings, nothing is all bad and nothing is all good. And so the paradoxes in American history are particularly strong, considering the ways that people view the relationship, view the value of the United States in history and in the world today. I think it's always worthwhile to explore this. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of just jump right in and talk about where this comes from and what these paradoxes are. So starting at the beginning of American history, we start with, okay, it's a little bit wrong to call it a blank slate, because obviously people were living in North and South America before the Europeans showed up. But in terms of world history, from a world historical scale, you don't get much blanker slates than the one that the Europeans ran into when they started to colonize. And because what happened when Columbus showed up was he brought with him, for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in my classes, he brought with him a lot of old world Eurasian African diseases that then spread throughout North and South America and wiped out 90% of the population there. And I don't say this to diminish the culture of native peoples, of the indigenous peoples of North and South America, but from a historical standpoint, they were practically wiped out. It was very difficult for them to come back and stage any kind of counteroffensive or resistance against the Europeans as they came in. So in starting American history, we start from that blank slate and the different groups who come in and the reasons why the different groups who came into North and South America, why they came there and what they were hoping to accomplish. And there were a couple of different reasons why these different groups came in. One of the most famous groups in terms of the United States of America as we know it today were the Pilgrims and the Puritans, the religious separatists who came over from England and wanting to create a religious community. And from that desire to create a religious community, you get an ideal of creating a perfect place on earth, that creating a city for God. They called it the shining city on the hill. They wanted to, and we'll talk about why also, but they wanted to create a place where they could worship for themselves the way they wanted to and not be bothered by the less Christian types, according to them, who were in the old world. And so there's an idealism there, a utopianism there that is really important for understanding a lot of the motivations for certain groups of Americans for progressivism. And I just lump this under, well, okay, we'll come back to this. I want to ask, when you think about the United States, what words pop into your head? Go ahead and just put it into chat. and put it in the group chat, no wrong answers here. Which words pop into your head most readily when you think about the United States? Positive or negative? Don't worry, I'm American, but I'm not sensitive about it. So feel free with top 3 words as they come into your head, type them into chat to the everyone group. All good answers here. Communism, interesting. I guess anti-communism in a way. OBCD, I'm not familiar with that one. Divide is a good one. So 2 of my 3 paradoxes, half of 2 of my 3 paradoxes are on here. One of the big ones I haven't seen yet, that's kind of cool. American Dream, I love that. The good half of one, so I'll give you the paradoxes that I've got so far. So freedom, I'll give you the positive ones that you guys have. We have freedom is one of the side of one of the paradoxes. Okay, and then democracy is another side. And a lot of these kind of loop in. And so one thing, immigrants is part of it. So these are the 3 big ones. And I think a lot of the positive things people usually associate with the United States fit into these groups. So like capitalism, for example, goes under the freedom part, and the kind of patriotic part that kind of goes under the democracy part, but that also goes under the utopianism part. It's not a perfect combination because the utopianism kind of fits within all of these. But okay, so freedom in terms of America, and American Dream is on there too, which the American Dream is the idea that you can come to the United States, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can come to the United States and you can work hard and be rewarded for your hard work, regardless of who you are, as long as you work hard. That's really what it comes down to for the American Dream. Now, the reality is that's not really true for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is if you're poor, it is hard to have the same opportunities that you have that someone who is rich has, right? So even if you work super, super hard, that doesn't mean that someone can just swoop in with $1 million and make your idea. They're like, oh, nice idea. I'm going to take that, change the name, and do it myself with more capital. And so I'm going to get all the profits from your idea and you'll get nothing. Thank you, sir. Good day. And this is the other, so the American Dream can work. There are plenty of examples of it. And America is a very good place for it to work. But as if you've read The Great Gatsby, I mean, there's a million different reasons for it, but Americans tend to ignore the class and historical power of economics part of things. Nobody in America has read Marx practically. Like they don't have a class view of things. If you talk about class with Americans, it makes them very deeply uncomfortable. So on the freedom side, that's true, but like the guy swooping in and taking your idea, if you have the freedom to do whatever you want to, that means you have the freedom to do whatever you want to, and people don't always want to do good things. So on the freedom side, you also have exploitation. If you're free, this is the tragedy of the commons. If nobody's in charge and anybody can do anything, then the people who want to do the bad stuff and the people who find the advantage will take the advantage. And this has worked. I mean, this works in 2 ways. This is what chaos does. Chaos is a ladder. Some people benefit from these things. And so the people who definitely do not benefit from this view of freedom are minorities, people who are historically disadvantaged, people who don't have power to begin with, or capital or money, social connections. And so these are two sides. So in America, you have massive wealth inequality, but also you have fewer barriers to advancement than many places have. And another way that you can think of all of these is the difference between freedom from and freedom to. This line in America, if we're going to size it up, like freedom from is much smaller, and freedom to is much larger. You're much more free. If you're going to make a decision in America, it's generally about you have the right to do things rather than you have the right to be free from things. And that's where America tends to lean. Okay, so what is the flip side of the democracy? Well, democracy, it's a great idea. Everybody loves democracy. Even communists love democracy. Democracy is something that we can all agree on. People viewing, people working together to speak their voice, to decide what's happening in society. Like like Marxist communism is supposed to be total democracy, right? The dictatorship of the proletariat. Everybody is voting, everybody is participating all the time, and everybody gets to say something about it. But as we also know historically from pretty much every version of American history and communist history, there's always problems with democracy because of power, and people who have power have a little bit more vote. If you got power, you got more vote, you can influence everybody else's vote, and this is where the corruption side comes in. So we have democracy, but everybody being able to vote means you have a corruption of the system, and democracy doesn't always work the way that it's supposed to work. Just like communism is also it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to work. Nothing people usually do tends to work the way that people want it to work, because humans are weak, humans are lazy, humans are great and hopeful. We're all these things. Humans are paradoxes, and Americans are paradoxes too. So you have the history of democracy, you got the founding fathers. Like if we want to do some notes, like we have freedom in terms of the American dream, but then you also have unrestricted, you have like robber barons in the 19th century, for example. So two sides of the same coin. The democracy corruption thing, you have the founding fathers, but then you also have the fact that the founding fathers owned slaves and gave jobs to their kids, that kind of thing. And the original Constitution was set up to keep wealth in the hands of wealthy. And and so, yeah, but on the other hand, it's also improved over time. There have been it has taken a while, but there has been improvements in quality of life for minority groups. If you are a minority, that's a problem with democracy. The majority may be able to take advantage of you, that kind of thing. Now, I think the flip side to multiculturalism is fairly straightforward. Can anybody tell me what the bad thing that America does that's the opposite side of multiculturalism we famously have in America? It's been a big issue this year. Yeah, racism. This one is baked into the pie. The entire economic foundation of the United States was built on a foundation of slavery from the jump. From the very beginning, before America was a country, at the very beginning of it being a colony of Britain, there were slaves in the United States. Now, part of that is an economic function of the fact that nobody lived there before the Europeans showed up. And then if you're a rich person moving to a weird place where you don't know how to do anything, usually when you're a rich person, you hire somebody to do the work that you don't want to do yourself. That's how it works. But who do you hire when you go to the New World? There's nobody there. the natives all can just go run off into where they come from and they don't have to follow you. So you bring over people who don't have any choice, people who are either contractually required to work for you or who you treat like a literal livestock and own as a human being. These are the foundations of where slavery comes from. And then in order to justify slavery, racism is basically invented when people started saying, like, is it bad to treat people like this? And they said, no, they're not actually people. They're livestock. Look how different they are. Look at how different their culture is. Look how poor they are because we don't give them any money. Like, oh, look, we're going to take care of them. We're actually doing the good thing by taking care of them. So actually, you're the jerk for asking about it, and I'm good because I own human beings. People can rationalize anything. Now, that fundamental belief serves to drive a great deal of American tension to this day, not only because of the historically oppressed minorities, but also because of the resentment that people have for, they don't want to feel guilty. Nobody wants to feel guilty about something that their great grandfather did, especially if you don't, maybe you are racist, or maybe you just don't care because you're not a minority. I mean, this is where a lot of the Trump stuff comes from today. And so on one hand, you have the melting pot of multiculturalism, the Statue of Liberty, the things that people really value about the American identity. And then on the other side, you have the white Protestant Christian majority. Now, I'm not against religion or faith in any kind of way, but there is a American identity that rejects pretty much anything that's not white Christian Protestant. And it almost defines itself as being in opposition to anything that is not white Protestant Christian. And so, and you can see clear evidence of that in the last 20 years. You can see clear evidence of the melting pot thing in Black Lives Matter, civil rights movement going back through American history. So you have two stories of America, and you have two different competing stories of America that simultaneously both of them achieve good things and both of them achieve bad things. Because even the good parts, bad things are done in the name of the good parts all the time. So with that in mind, I think, all right, this is the American paradoxes. I use this to explore, to make sure that we're keeping a balance when we talking about America. Like, I tend to lean toward kind of the dark part a little bit. I tend to lean toward telling the dark part of the story of America, just because that's one that doesn't always get told. But I'm also very patriotic, and I think that the light part of the story, maybe if you've seen the movie Inside Out, spoilers at the end, I guess, sorry, if you haven't seen Inside Out, you should probably watch Pixar movies more often. But when she picks up the orb at the end of Inside Out, and she realizes that, oh, this moment is a happy moment for these reasons, and this is a sad moment for these reasons, right? That's really how you need to look at American history, because despite all the darkness and the sadness and the badness and the human exploitation and the murder and death and all the negativity, on the flip side, this is the first time in history since like ancient Greece that there is a functioning democracy where people get to determine for themselves from the ground up what they want the place they live in to be, the rules for what they want it to be. And yeah, it was done by a bunch of slave-owning rich people at the beginning, but that's not where it ended up. And that's not where it's necessarily always going. For now, it's always an open question. We're always telling the story. So the ideals of the American democracy are real and valuable. And there are a lot of people who believe in freedom and democracy and multiculturalism. And there's a lot of people who don't care and are just in it for the exploitation, corruption, and racism, or use the racism to support the exploitation and corruption. But thanks to the fact that people do have the freedom that they have, it leans towards the light part over time. There's a famous quote by Martin Luther King Jr. who says, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Some people might disagree with me that that's the case of American history, but I would tend to take the case that yes, for all of the bad things the United States has done, due to democracy and freedom and the ideals of democracy and freedom, America, generally speaking, is very slowly and painfully and exhaustingly bending the arc of history towards justice. But we happen to be at a pretty dark moment now. So I also like to talk about the modern day when I'm talking about US history, because we're in a great moment of change. The United States is going through a major shift right now. And so there's a lot to understand. So with that in mind, just speaking in terms of AP history in the curriculum, we go through every unit in the AP history test through this lens. And we also talk about how to do essays and how to do multiple choice questions. And we make sure that we cover every important unit in all of our AP practice, all of our AP tests. Whether you've got your own class at school that you're taking AP history on, we can go with assignments and base it on the progress that you're making in your class. Or we can just start from scratch. If you're planning on taking it about a year from now, we can start a curriculum and start a reading routine, a regimen, and get you ready for the AP without your class. It is easier if you're doing it at school, but we can definitely do it together as well. So if anybody has any questions, I'd like to leave it open here. We've got a little bit of time here before we come to the end of the half hour. So please feel free to either speak up one at a time or to type into the chat any questions that you might have, whether about American history or about the class in general as well.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Great Gatsby within like the American Dream, and I read Great Gatsby like this year, and he like Great Gatsby got like his money from like some of it from selling illegal alcohol. So how would you put that as in like freedom?
Okay, so he had the ability to do it, right? And he had the freedom to do it. He had the freedom to pretend to be wealthy. He had the freedom to work. He worked hard. Now, he did it illegally, but he also had the freedom to spend his money however he wanted to. And there were fewer restrictions on him than there might be. The federal government at that point was practically nothing. And in fact, prohibition was one of the first times in American history where the federal government started to actually assert itself in law enforcement. Up until that, that's where the FBI got started in the first place. There was hardly any kind of federal law enforcement up until that point. Prior to World War I, the American government was limited to basically the post office and occasionally the army. And there was hardly any kind of federal power at that point. And so like Gatsby was able to do whatever he wanted to, including illegal things, as long as he could work around it. And then once he got that money, he could do whatever he wanted with it. You can see parallels in like Al Capone and the famous gangsters of the 1920s. That's a story of American freedom. There isn't a lot of social restriction. If you get away with it, if you can do it and get away with it, people are like, well, it was illegal, but he did it, and look how successful he is. The success is proof enough. I mean, Donald Trump is a perfect example. It's like Donald Trump breaks all the rules of the norms of politics, and everybody's like, don't do that. That's a bad thing to do. You shouldn't do that. And he's like, I don't care. I'm winning. And then people are like, he is winning. That's a good thing that he's winning. Winning is good. Maybe he's good. And people tend to have that perspective in America, that success is its own justification. And so Gatsby is a similar kind of thing. There's a lot of parallels between Trump and Gatsby. I mean, Trump and Gatsby are pure American avatars. They're pure avatars of what the good and the bad of America can be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? We've got about 5 minutes. Feel free to fire away.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So would classes be like group classes or would they be one-on-one?
It depends on the situation and the scheduling. Generally speaking, we have group classes for the test prep. I will actually, let me share a slide here. That's all worked out through StandOutPrep. They will figure out what's the best circumstance. It changes depending, but here's the layout for the class times and what we're having at camp this winter, for example. But long term, I frequently have group classes of 2, 3, 4. I've had larger, but usually people can't coordinate their schedules extremely well for extremely long. So yeah, it's usually 2 to 3 students on average for a class like that.
And like, since we might not all be like in the same class, how would we match up the content like at school?
Well, okay, so if we've got a group of people at different schools with different curriculums, then we'll just fundamentally go with my curriculum. I'll keep everybody on the same page. If it's one-on-one, then I can go, then yeah, I can spend that time. But generally speaking, even if different people have 2 different curriculums at 2 different schools, that because it's an AP curriculum foundationally, they generally tend to line up even from school to school because everybody's got to get a certain amount done by Christmas and they got to get a certain amount done by graduation. I've never actually had a difficulty with it. I've never not had it line up in some fashion.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Well, is the U.S. more of a republic or a democracy? It's definitely a republic because of the nature of the government, the way the government is structured. There's just no denying that the United States is a republic. And a true democracy in history is really hard to find at a large scale. So, yeah, the United States is definitely a republic with democratic principles, with democratic ideals. So, yeah, I would, for me, it's fairly hard to argue any other way. Since you have a representative democracy, you got yourself a republic. Does that answer your question? Anybody else? Feel free. Got time for one more, I think, before we take off. Any topic. Well, from a purely Marxist perspective, communism is pure democracy. So the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat is the idea that from the ground up in communism, everybody is voting all the time, that there's not actually any kind of hierarchy at the top, that the hierarchy is entirely dependent on the choices made by, say, like in the Russian system, the Soviet system, you start at like the neighborhood level, and then you have like the district level, the city level, the state level, then the national level. And all the time, everybody's getting together and making decisions, and you don't have anybody in power at top because every time everybody comes together, you basically create a new constitution or a new system fundamentally every time. Now that's pure in a vacuum communism. What actually happens is that power makes power makes power. So if you have power, you manipulate those situations, and then you have more power, so you can continue to manipulate those situations. But in a vacuum, in a book, communism is pure democracy. It's just the people ruling themselves without any kind of input from an elite class, ideally. But that's not what happened anywhere that tried it. So does that answer your question? Okay. So great getting a chance to speak with all of you. I hope to get a chance to work with all of you, whether it's this winter or in the spring when we do the prep. So please send a message to you see in the slide there to Janet at StandOutPrep.com, and hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving and have a happy holidays. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.